Have you ever noticed how your brain on a tough day can go to thinking, this is just who I am, this is my life now, I'm never going to get out of feeling like this? Like it's not just one bad day, but a permanent part of you, as if you've been stamped with the word failure and that's the whole story. And when you add disability into that mix, it can feel even more complicated because disability doesn't just change your body, your access needs, or your plans. It can trigger a whole bunch of other self-limiting beliefs that sound like facts, but they aren't really true. It's the fear and worry dressing up as reliable information, almost like three small kids in a trench coat saying, yep, hello, I'll make all of the decisions from now on. You might find yourself thinking things like, I'm a burden, I'm not attractive anymore, people will leave me, I am too much work, I will never be able to be independent, I just don't belong anywhere. That's what I want to talk about today. Those beliefs don't just form out of nowhere. They are formed for a reason. Sometimes they keep us stuck in ways that might seem like personality or attitude, but really they are protective strategies. Maybe they are old wounds getting poked or new pain with familiar voices, or perhaps it is society's weird obsession with measuring worth by how productive we are, how independent we appear, or how little support we actually need. Hello, lovely humans. Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Crippled Chronicles. I am Becca, an amputee with a microphone and a love for researching. I aim to be accurate, but I am a human being and it is not always going to be perfect. So if you have a better source or lived experience, always drop it below in the comments, or you can send me an email to crippledchroniclespod@gmail.com. Read it, I like to try and learn, and maybe it will help me to develop a better nuanced perspective on things. Today I want to talk about self-limiting beliefs and disability using schemas as an underlying framework, but keeping it real and practical. I want to look at being born disabled versus becoming disabled later and how that might shift depending on whether disability comes in childhood, teenage years, young adulthood, midlife, or old age. I want to talk about how these beliefs form, how they can keep you stuck, and how you can start challenging them without having to do the whole toxic positivity thing where you are expected to just CBT your way out of pain and disability. This is a quick content note. This is not medical advice. I am not a doctor. I do not know your medical background. I am just me in your ears or on your screen trying to put language to some of the stuff that we mostly carry quietly and can beat ourselves up for. This is an episode that is about understanding, not trying to label or diagnose. Before I go any further, maybe in the comments you can answer, or just to yourself, what is the most believable self-limiting belief that you carry? Not the most dramatic one, the one that feels that it is the most obviously true in your mind. And can you pinpoint when you first learned it? For me, it was that I was unlovable, that I could no longer do the things that I used to do, that I couldn't be the person who did the chasing, that people weren't going to want to stay. That tumbles straight into feeling like I'm a failure or that I'm weak for struggling. The thing is, though, all of that self-doubt and shame had been in me for years. I used to use it to push myself forward, to be quote unquote a better version a better version of myself. But the reality is I was running myself into the ground. Disability didn't create those beliefs, it just turned the volume up so loud that I couldn't easily ignore them anymore. I genuinely believed that if I couldn't go back to the Becca that I was before I had the accident, then what was the point? And I'm saying that out loud because I know I'm not the only one that's been there. When amputation first became a real possibility. Boys. Cats. I don't even remember where I was. The joy of having a kitten in the house is just knocked something over in the kitchen and totally throwing me off of where I was. So perfect. Saying out loud that I didn't know what the point was if I couldn't go back to being who I was before, because I know I'm not the only person that's been there. When amputation first became a real possibility for me, my brain went straight to, I don't want to live if I lose my leg. And that was the reality that I lived in probably for another year to a year and a half after. It wasn't until 2022 into 2023 that I started to properly recognise some of the beliefs for what they were, not truths, not prophecies, but fear. And even then, it took me even more time to be able to talk about it without bursting into tears every single sentence. If you would like to share your self-limiting beliefs down below in the comments, I would genuinely love to hear them, because I feel like naming them sometimes is the first crack. It's not really a breakthrough. Sometimes it can feel fucking awful, but sometimes it can help. And if you don't feel like you want to write it out, that's okay too. I just want you to know that it won't feel like this forever, even if it feels really, really shitty right now. Just before I get into the actual bulk of this episode, if talking about self-limiting beliefs kind of brings up any thoughts about not wanting to be here anymore, please reach out to someone in your life that you trust, a support line that is in your country, and just know that you don't have to hold that pain alone. You are deserving of love and support, even if your brain tells you otherwise some days. What are self-limiting beliefs? When I say self-limiting beliefs, I don't just mean a random negative thought that pops in and out. I mean the kind of thought that starts to feel like it's a rule or a fact, like a conclusion that your brain's already decided. I've got some examples. So a thought is, while that interaction felt awkward, a self-limiting belief is, I am awkward, people don't like me, I shouldn't bother next time. Second, a thought is, I'm struggling today. A self-limiting belief is, I can't cope, I'm weak, I'm never going to be okay. For me, disability made these beliefs feel ridiculously convincing, because it changes your body, your routines, your access, and often your independence overnight or over time. So your brain goes looking for an explanation, and it usually picks the one that hurts the most, because in a backwards way somewhere it thinks it keeps us safe. And self-limiting beliefs usually feel like a truth for three reasons. First, they often have a history. They're not new, they're old beliefs that have fresh evidence. Disability doesn't always create them, it gives them new material. The belief can shift slightly, but the emotional root is still there, the same as it has always been. Secondly, they feel protective. A lot of these beliefs are a way of our brains trying to avoid pain. Like, if I believe people are going to leave me, then I can create distance first. I can run away before things get too real. I can reject myself before anybody even gets the chance. It's messed up, but it is a way of self-protection. Thirdly, self-limiting beliefs can feel true because they feel like they're reinforced by the world. We don't form beliefs in a vacuum. We form them in a world that constantly sends us messages about disability, about worth, about our bodies, about independence, about productivity, about what kind of person is acceptable to be seen and what kind of person isn't. And this is where the background of schemas come into it without me kind of trying to turn it into a textbook. Schemas are basically deep belief templates. So a self-limiting belief is often the sentence that you hear in your head, and the schema is the root that is underlying underneath it. The schema is the root that's lying underneath it. That's a bit better. And I think that's the part that makes it tricky, because some people can identify when they have a self-limiting belief that it's not true, but it feels like a fact. So if you've ever been in a situation where you think, why can I not just logic myself out of this? And it's because you're not really dealing with logic in that situation. You're dealing with a self-limiting belief that believes it is doing its job. It's trying to keep you safe, even if it feels like it's doing it in the most emotionally violent way possible. I'll kind of give you an example of what that looked like for me, because I've kind of slowly learned to track my beliefs over time. In relationships early on after my accident, it was the big obvious ones. I'm a burden, I'm unlovable. And then as time passed and my life got smaller physically because I was bedbound and couldn't really leave the house, it kind of shifted into a different fear. People are bored of spending time with me. Like, I wasn't enough because I couldn't offer normal fun plans or spontaneity, and being in my room instead of outside doing things felt like evidence that I was almost the worst version of myself in that moment. And that was really hard to identify initially, but that belief didn't appear out of nowhere. It poked old pain from past relationships where I'd been cheated on, and it almost became this horrible little confirmation in my head that if I ever fell for somebody, I would just be a placeholder until they found someone better. So then it felt like I had to over-explain everything constantly. Like, if I could just say the right things, maybe I'd finally be understood. And what I only realised years later was that it wasn't a personal failure. I was often being misunderstood by people that didn't want to take the time to understand me, no matter how much I over-explained or tried to get it perfect. Before disability, my coping mechanism was to shape myself into whoever was more palatable, adjusting my thoughts, words, behaviour around people, because I believe that made me easier to love, easier to keep near, easier to not leave, which is exhausting. And it links directly into the next belief that showed up, the one that ended up making my world physically smaller as well as emotionally smaller. Because one of the biggest internalised beliefs when I first became disabled was, I don't deserve to take up space. If you've never experienced disability, that might sound dramatic, but let me explain. When I had that Lazarov frame in a wheelchair that had to be bigger to fit the frame, that belief got amplified every single day. Struggling to get through doors, struggling to navigate pavements, narrow shop aisles, busy spaces where people don't look, having to have somebody with me when I leave the house because I just can't get myself about, having people nearly walking into me when I've got this big massive frame and there's literally pins inside of my leg holding all of the pieces of my bone together, and people just aren't paying attention. It's impossible in that moment to feel like I deserve to take up space. The world felt like it was constantly built to remind me that I don't fit. One of the first years after I had my leg amputated, I went to Edinburgh on my accident anniversary. And you know, one of the things that made me cry was going into the station the way that I had remembered going before I was disabled, and we got to where I was meant to get off, and outside of the lift, there was only stairs to get to where we needed to go. So we had to go a way back up and around and try and find a way. And it almost felt like this really shitty reminder that, like, haha, you were in an accident and now you can't get upstairs. Like, it sounds dramatic, but it's true. Like, it felt so shitty in that moment. And that was later on. That was after I had my leg amputated, after the frame was off and my wheelchair was smaller. It was still difficult, but in those times when I had the frame on, I truly believed that I didn't deserve to take up space. So I stopped taking up that space. I stayed indoors. I didn't ask to go out. I didn't want to be seen as being too much effort. I didn't want to be the reason that plans changed. So that belief that I didn't deserve to take up space was protecting me from potential rejection and disappointment. But the cost of that was that slowly my life shrunk around it. And like I said, that belief does still show up sometimes after amputation. When I'm in a smaller chair, it still shows up in small shops, busy, compacted areas, inaccessible layouts, all of it. But I also had to confront something that I'd been doing even before disability. I was somebody that wore dark clothes. I tried not to draw attention. I tried to blend in. Being disabled and having a massive fuck off frame on my leg made visibility unavoidable. And to be fair, after my accident, I could feel the eyes on me more and people approached me more. That was real. But somewhere along the way, something changed. I can't pinpoint the exact moment, but I know what it looks like now. Instead of going straight to self-blame, like, I don't deserve to take up space, I don't deserve to be here, I shout, excuse me, can you please move? I speak to staff when bathrooms are unsafe. I point out maybe in shops where it's inaccessible. And it's not because I've suddenly become fearless, it's because slowly I've learned to separate what a false belief is from what is actually true. And the true thing is this: I deserve to take up space. Inaccessibility is not my fault. It is not a punishment for something I did wrong. It is not proof that I deserve pain or a harder life. But for a long time, that is what I believed, and it really kept me stuck. With a lot of healing over the past few years, one of the things that helped me to shift was a conversation with Eleanor. Blunt as hell, but exactly what I needed. I was spiraling and feeling like I was being punished for something I did because I must be so horrible in a previous life or must have done something so bad to end up like that. And she said, babe, it's not all about you. Like, you're not that important. Like, the universe is not out to get you. And like I said, it was blunt, but sometimes that is what I need. It did feel like everything was out to get me, and really a lot of it is just places being inaccessible or people being unaware and dealing with their own shit. It's not targeted at me, even when it impacts me. And that tiny shift helps to stop that spiral turning into a full-blown shame spiral. Sometimes, not all the time, but it's helped me to identify things. And I guess a way of me explaining that without it in story format is name the belief. What is it? One sentence, not an essay, no over-explaining. Name what it is trying to protect you from: rejection, shame, being pitied, being abandoned. And name what it costs you. What does believing it stop you from doing, asking for, or enjoying? Because the point isn't to think positive. The point's to see the pattern. Because once you see the pattern, you can start identifying things and stop living within it. Like I mentioned in the introduction, timing sometimes matters here. Whether you're born disabled, become disabled as a child, teen, young adult, in midlife, or in later life, it changes the shape of how these self-limiting beliefs can look. Sometimes the belief looks the same, but the way it formed and the way it sticks can be completely different. When I say disabled people, it can sound like one category, but the distinction that I just mentioned there of being born disabled up to becoming disabled in older age can shape your story. And let me just be clear here before anybody tries to start some kind of like oppression Olympics in their heads or in the comments. This is not me talking about who has it worse. It's not a fucking competition. But there is research on these things, and I think it's interesting to talk about. There is research on congenital versus acquired disability that talks about something called disability self-concept, which is basically two things coming together: disability identity and disability self-efficacy, and how those link with satisfaction and quality of life. I want to try and explain it in a way, like I mentioned earlier, that it's not like reading a textbook or like you've just accidentally entered into some like professor's Zoom call. Disability identity is how you relate to disability as part of your life. Do you experience it as, one, this is part of who I am; two, this is something that happened to me; three, this is something that I'm still trying to make sense of; four, this is something that I want to hide; five, this is something that I feel proud about; or honestly, all of the above depending on the day. Disability self-efficacy is your confidence that you can handle what disability asks of you, not by doing everything alone, but by problem solving, adapting, asking for support, advocating, learning the tricks, and being able to recover when things go wrong. And just to clarify, because my brain loves a bit of chaos and I always mess up words, every time I say self-efficacy, it goes to self-defecation, and I've said this in another episode, but this is a different concept, different day, different pair of trousers. What's useful about this research is it suggests when disability is congenital. When disability is congenital, people might have had longer to develop that disability self-concept over time, compared with people who acquire disability later and have to rebuild identity and coping beliefs during a major life change. There's also the layer of society. Internalised ableism can impact identity, health, and well-being, especially in young disabled people, because you are absorbing messages about disability whilst you are still at the core of forming who you are. So with that in mind, let me try and walk you through a timeline. Born disabled. If you were born disabled, disability isn't a before and after, it's just you. And that can bring a kind of groundedness that people who acquire disability later in life sometimes don't have, because you've never had the illusion that your body is guaranteed to cooperate in a way that it cannot. But it also means that you have had a lifetime of other people narrating your life. Adults deciding what you can do, what you should want, whether you're inspirational, whether your needs are inconvenient, and whether access is optional. That can build beliefs like, I have to prove I'm capable, I'm only valued when I'm impressive, or my needs are too much. Became disabled in childhood. Childhood disability often means your core beliefs get shaped whilst you're still learning what safety and belonging even are. I'm not speaking for anybody here when I go through these stages, but just trying to show what these things can look like. Common themes people describe include being treated as fragile, being overprotected, being singled out, being excluded socially, being made to feel like a disruption, or learning that praise only comes when you cope quietly. And that can shape beliefs like don't make a fuss, don't ask, don't take up space, be grateful, or you're harder to love. There's also research suggesting that childhood disability can have long-term mental health implications later in life, including more depressive symptoms in later adulthood, not because disability magically causes depression, but because the stress load, exclusion, and lack of support compound over time. Becoming disabled in adolescence. Teen years are already stress, chaos, and quite frankly, a bowl of identity soup for young people. You're forming self-image, friendships, first relationships, trying to belong, trying not to explode with being self-conscious in public. When disability enters here, beliefs can hook straight into visibility and social safety. It can become everyone's watching, I'm behind, I'm embarrassing, I don't fit, I'm going to be rejected. And the desire to blend in can clash hard with being more visible. Another big theme that people describe at this stage is masking, not just neurodivergent masking, but disability masking too, trying to look less disabled, trying to act like they're not struggling, trying to keep up so that they don't get left behind. Becoming disabled in young adulthood. Young adulthood is often where you are building your own independence and identity in real time. Career plans, education, relationships. This is where my life starts kind of vibe. So when disability hits here, the belief set often attaches to competence and worth. I'm failing at adulthood, I'm behind, I'm not who I was meant to be, I can't offer what I used to. And that's where my experience sits. Because before I was even physically disabled, I had already learned that my needs were too much. Growing up, I was split between environments that were unstable and unsafe and demanded a very specific, happy family performance in each house. My worth got tied to being high functioning, being quiet, being small, being low maintenance, achieving enough to escape. I was really working hard to try and get away from the circumstances I was born into. By the time my accident happened, I was right at the point where it felt like the payoff was finally coming. I was the first in my immediate family to graduate uni. I'd secured a job as a band 5 mental health nurse, and then it was gone in the blink of an eye, in the turn of a corner. And for me, if your worth is built on performance, on pushing through, on being useful, disability doesn't just feel like grief. It can feel like an entire identity collapse, like you've lost the one thing that you used to prove that you even deserve to exist in the first place. Becoming disabled in midlife. Midlife disability often collides with roles that you've already built and responsibilities that are not easy to just put on pause. Work identity, caregiving, parenting, financial stressors, a sense of I'm the one who holds things together. So if disability enters here, self-limiting beliefs can sound like I'm letting everyone down, I'm not allowed to need help, I am disposable, and I have to keep functioning no matter what. And I think sometimes the don't take up space belief that I mentioned can often show up as I don't have time to have needs. Same belief, just shifted to fit around adult responsibilities. There can be also a specific kind of shame that hits in midlife disability because society has this pretty icky idea that your value is inherently linked to your output. And if you can't produce like the way you used to, people treat it like it is a personal failure instead of an unfortunate reality. Becoming disabled in older age, I think this is where it can get a little bit messy. People can often treat it as just aging, but that sounds harmless until it becomes dismissal. Needs get minimised, pain gets brushed off, support is delayed, and there is a double layer of ageism and ableism. Self-limiting beliefs here can become, my world's supposed to shrink anyway, I shouldn't bother, I'm a burden, it's too late, I should just be grateful for what I've had. And I think a dangerous self-limiting belief here for me is this is inevitable, because inevitable beliefs kill advocacy. They make people stop asking for access and connection because they start believing that a smaller life in old age is a correct life. I have seen it in older adults who will point blank refuse to go to the doctors or hospital because they believe if they're admitted, they won't get home, that they will be put into a care home or die in hospital, which I suppose comes with control and wanting to be in their own surroundings when the end might come. So I think people can ask, is this belief about how I felt before disability, or is it about society? And the annoying answer is unfortunately usually both. Your history gives disability a script, and society almost keeps handing you evidence for that script. And that is where the schema kind of matters. There is a study in people with disabilities that found early maladaptive schemas were strongly linked to self-stigma, with schemas like social isolation and dependence standing out as key predictors. But the really useful real life bit is psychological flexibility helps to buffer that link. Basically, the ability to notice a thought like, I'm a burden, and not treat it like a fact or a rule you have to follow. Self-compassion is also linked with lower self-stigma. And I think self-compassion can kind of sound a bit fluffy until you actually try it and realise, oh shit, I speak to myself like I am my own worst enemy. And that was one of the hardest parts of therapy for me, confronting the way I actually talk to myself when I'm struggling, because it's not just I feel bad, it's and I feel absolutely fucking worthless for feeling bad. And that extra layer is the bit that was keeping me stuck. If that last section made you go, oh, yep, that's me, then here's the next piece. How do those self-limiting beliefs actually form, and why do they feel so sticky? Because it's easy to hear a belief like, I'm a burden, and think, okay, cool, I'll just tell myself the opposite. But these beliefs aren't built like Lego, they're built like concrete, they set over time. And I like to think of it like a recipe, kind of easier to break down into 3 ingredients. The first ingredient is your pre-existing template, and I want to say pre-existing in an inclusive way because that applies whether you're born disabled, became disabled later, or if you're listening to this and you're not disabled at all. We all have baseline beliefs about worth, safety, belonging, love, independence, and whether we're allowed to actually have needs. For some people, disability arrives later, so those templates were built before disability and then disability collided with them. For people born disabled, the templates are formed alongside disability, shaped by family, school, healthcare, peers, and society's reactions. If you're listening as someone who isn't disabled, you still have templates too, because self-limiting beliefs are a human brain thing. Disability just has a way of putting them under a spotlight and stress testing them. Schemas are basically those deep templates, the broad themes about yourself and relationships that tend to develop early and repeat across life. The second ingredient is lived experience, actual barriers, actual losses, actual people just being weird. And I say that with love, but also accuracy. This might be lifelong if you were born disabled. It might kick in later if disability is acquired or if disability becomes more visible, more complex, or more demanding. Inaccessible doors, unsafe bathrooms, systems that make you prove that you're disabled enough, strangers staring at you, friends not knowing what to say, doctors dismissing you, workplaces quietly rewarding you when you cope and punishing you when you have needs. It's hard to not form limiting beliefs when you're repeatedly shown that you don't fit the default setting. The third ingredient, society's storyline about disability. Internalised ableism is basically when the world's messaging becomes our inner voice. There's research with disabled young people showing internalised ableism can impact identity, health, and well-being. And honestly, you don't have to be young for that to land. It just often starts young because those messages get absorbed so early on and are reactivated later. When these three ingredients mix, you get a belief that feels like a fact. And that's the part that keeps you stuck, the loop, because the belief isn't just a thought, it becomes a system. Here's the basic loop, and maybe you can listen and find where you recognise yourself. Something happens, a trigger. It can be something big, like a diagnosis or a change in mobility, or something tiny, like not being able to get up the ramp and go in to get a coffee somewhere. Your brain interprets this through the belief. You then feel something, usually shame, anxiety, grief, anger, embarrassment, or hopelessness. You then do an action to protect yourself, and whatever you do works in the short term because it reduces that discomfort, but it costs you in the long term, and that cost then becomes more evidence for the belief. Trigger, story, feeling, protection, short-term relief, long-term cost, reinforcement of the belief. Disability is almost the perfect environment for this loop because there are so many repeat triggers. Let's kind of put a real example on it. I've been using imagery and examples because it feels like the best way to break down complex and nuanced topics into one episode without making it like a total series. Say the belief is, I don't deserve to take up space. Trigger, you're in a small shop, narrow aisles, people not looking, someone sighs behind you. Story that you tell yourself. I'm in the way, I'm the problem, I'm causing other people inconvenience. The feeling is shame, panic, you can feel the heat rushing to your face. Protection strategy, you rush, you apologise, you leave without buying what you even needed. You stop going to that shop altogether. Short-term relief, you escape that feeling. Long-term cost, your world shrinks. You begin to avoid more places. You lose practice and advocacy. And every time you avoid, the belief gets stronger because it goes, see, we didn't actually belong there in the first place. You're not just dealing with inaccessibility, you're dealing with an internal rule that believes that you need to disappear. I have another little example, a relationship belief like, I'm too much. The trigger is someone takes longer to reply, they cancel plans, or you notice yourself needing more support than you want to need. Story that you tell yourself, they must be getting tired of me. The feeling that you have, anxiety, shame, the urge to over-explain yourself or apologise. Protection strategy, you either overfunction, over-explain, over-justify, or you do the total opposite and you go silent first. The short-term relief is that you feel in control. The long-term relief is you can feel burnt out for performing, or you isolate and lose connection. And again, that belief gets fed that it's true. If you related to any of these examples, or it reminded of something that you believe yourself, the loop is not you being dramatic. It is your brain trying to do threat detection. It is just using the wrong criteria for threat. It treats needing help as danger. It treats being seen as danger. It treats being different as danger. And it is trying its best to act accordingly. I also want to name something that I think a lot of us experience, because it used to make me feel like I'm failing when I'm doing okay, like I'm functioning, and I can usually recognise what's not true. I can see the pattern and I can go, right, okay, well, that's the belief talking, not reality. But when I'm overloaded, when I'm past my limit, I can't see the opposite. The belief gets so loud that it feels like it's the only voice inside my head. It's the only voice in the room that I can hear. It's like my brain loses all of the access to the evidence that I've built up, that I'm safe, loved, capable enough, whatever other affirmations that I have in relation to my negative self-beliefs. I came to learn that because when you're overloaded, your nervous system isn't interested in balanced thinking. It's interested in threat detection. It wants simple rules. It wants certainty. And self-limiting beliefs are very certain. Being able to identify these things doesn't help me when I'm overloaded. Even if I tell myself that I'm loved or enough, I don't believe it in the way that I believe those self-limiting beliefs. They may show up less, but they're still very much there. So part of this loop isn't just challenging the thought. Sometimes the first step is bring the overwhelm down enough that you can access perspective again, because you can't reason with a brain that is stuck in survival mode. You can only try and support it back into regulation. I had a bit of a chunk about some self-compassion therapy and why it was difficult for me, and then like some coping things of how people can use different skills to cope with self-limiting beliefs and kind of challenge that mindset. However, I am 55 minutes into recording. I actually recorded half of this episode like 2 weeks ago, and then I had a really bad pain flare up, and then I cleared out my camera roll and didn't realise that I deleted the half episode that I recorded. So instead of me recording for 20 minutes today, I've now been recording for 55. So I am going to try and wrap this episode up. I have another one coming that I am recording after this, and it will be out in a few weeks' time. And if you want some coping strategies of this episode, please leave a comment down below, because it would let me know that you actually are interested in it, and I will come back to it. However, my back is fucking killing me today, so I am gonna stop this yap fest kinda soon and try and wrap up. But even though me saying that it's me, I could probably be speaking for another 15 minutes. But if I didn't cut out the section that I've just cut out, I could have easily been speaking for another half an hour, and I just don't have it in me today. So something that I wanted to bring up kind of near the end of this is talking about toxic positivity, because toxic positivity is when people demand that you replace reality with good vibes, good thoughts. Everything happens for a reason. Just be grateful. You're so inspiring. At least it's not worse. Woo! No, sometimes it is worse. Sometimes it's unfair. Sometimes it's fucking exhausting. And pretending otherwise doesn't heal you. It just adds to the shame. What we're aiming for is something else. It's realistic compassion. It's being able to say, this is hard, and also being able to say, I'm allowed to take up space whilst this feels hard. I can still choose one small action, even if I feel terrible. It's the middle path, not denial, not despair, and not sunshine and rainbows. And if you're listening and thinking, okay, but what if the belief is so loud that I can't do any of this? That's where it goes back to what I said. Sometimes the first step is not challenging the belief, it's regulating enough that you can access perspective again. And you can't reason with a brain that's stuck in survival mode. You support it first and then you choose. That's it. Again and again, you just have to try, not perfectly, just repeatedly. Even when it gets easier to identify, it doesn't always mean it's easier to cope with. So, to pull it all together, self-limiting beliefs and disability are not just random negative thoughts. They're often rooted in deep templates about worth and belonging, shaped by life experience and reinforced by the world that we live in. And the timing of disability can change how these beliefs form, because it changes what you were building when disability entered your life, or how early you started observing messages about what disability actually means. But the good news is, if I can call it that, is that beliefs are not facts, even when they feel loud enough that it feels like they are. And if you take nothing else away from this episode, take away this. You don't have to argue your way out of a belief. You can practice your way out of it. Tiny actions, new evidence, realistic compassion, and no gaslighting yourself. Got it? No gaslighting yourself. That's an important one. If you're not disabled and you're listening, I appreciate you, and these things are important to be able to identify whether you're disabled or not, but also helping to challenge in them. Start early. The best time to build a kinder inner voice is before you are in desperate need of it. Thank you for being here. Please go drink some water, keep yourself hydrated, unclench your jaw, relax your shoulders, and go be some sexy little fucks. See you later. Goodbye.